presence of the Lord. I was meditating one day on Genesis, how God created, the heavens and the earth. Then in 6 days, he finished creation. Then on the seventh day, he rested. And I was thinking about when he created man, and he planted a garden, and he placed man in that garden. So I was thinking about that, and I said, why did God put him in a garden? Why did he make a garden? I looked at society and life today, and we have paved roads, we have cars, huge cities. But God created a garden. Something seemed off about that. Then I realized, just because God could do it, he doesn't. He doesn't have to. The power of God is demonstrated in his restraint. You see, if I was doing creation, I probably would have made a big city for Adam. He would have had a big city, he'd have running water, a toilet. I'd have put nice clothes on him. I'd have did all that I could do and all that I know to do. But then I realized this is nothing for God to do. God can easily create a car. God could create cities. He raises up kingdoms and he tears them down at his will. But in his creation, he didn't do all that he could do. But his power was demonstrated by what he didn't do. He had restraint. And I see that versus us as mankind. Well, as mankind. Because mankind wants to do all that they can do. They always want to demonstrate their power. They want to show you how big they are, how strong they are, how fast they are, and go do what they can do. But God doesn't have to do that. And that's where his power is shown. And it seems kind of confusing, but I guess it's called the paradoxical nature of God's grace. Like if we go to Genesis 11, we see how mankind wants to do. In Genesis 11, and it says, and the whole earth was of one language and of one speech, and it came to pass as they journeyed from the east, they found in the plain the land of Shinar, and they dwelt there. And they said to one another, go to, let us make brick and burn them thoroughly. And they had brick for stone and slime, and they had for mortar. And they said, go to, let us build us a city and a tower, whose top may reach unto the heaven, and let us make a name. Let us make us a name, lest we be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth. So we see when mankind got together, they said, let us show what we can do. Let's make us a big tower. Let's get a name for ourselves. And that's what mankind is doing to this day. When you go to major cities or every big cities, what is the first thing you see? It's big skyscrapers. Mankind showing, look how much and look how great we are. But God doesn't have to do that. When he got Israel, the first thing he had them build? A tent. And move it around. Mankind is building skyscrapers and towers and showing how great they are, and God makes a tent. And his power is demonstrated in there because of the restraint he had. And all throughout time, even though God showed his power, it was shown through his restraint. When mankind was showing as much as they can do, In the times of Noah, they were just going around running rampant with the knowledge of good and evil. And God had to cut them back, but he had restraint. He stopped at 8. He always knew when to stay the hand. And then we see that as we go forward, and even when Christ came. See, he took off of showing how great he was. He took off his glory. And he restrained himself. I believe that's in Philippians chapter 2. We'll see when Christ came. And we look at verse 6. It says, this is, who being in the form of God, thought it not robbery to be equal with God, but made himself of no reputation, and took upon him the form of a servant. He put himself in bondage. He had a restraint on. And was made in the likeness of men, and being found in the fashion of a man, he humbled himself and became obedient unto death, even to the death of the cross. So he made himself of no reputation. He humbled himself. He came and put on restraints. He put on human flesh. That was a restraint for God. But in that restraint, God's power was demonstrated. And we want to take that as an example for ourselves. You see, God's power is shown in his restraint, not of what he can do, but what he could do but doesn't do it. And we have to have that same example. Even when Christ himself was dealing with the enemy, he didn't deal with the enemy with his power. He dealt with him with restraint. If we go to Matthew 4, we have this Christ dealing with the tempter, Satan. And now look at this real quick, and it says, then was Jesus led up of the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted of the devil. And when he had fasted 40 days and 40 nights, he was afterward and hungered. And when the tempter came to him, he said, if thou be the Son of God, command that these stones be made bread. But he answered and said, it is written, man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceedeth out the mouth of God. Amen. Now right here, we have the enemy coming saying, demonstrate to me your power. How did Christ respond? With restraint. Turn these rocks into bread. Now, if that was me, I'll be honest, I'd have showed out. He'd have been like, turn these rocks into bread. I said, I'll one-up you. I'm going to make a bakery. I'm going to open up my own bakery and show you what I can do. Then we took him up high and says, well, jump down. And he sent his angels to bear you up. But what did he do? He had restraint. Now me, I probably would have flew. Show what I can do. Fall down, I'll do what I want. I'm going to fly. I'm going to go fly all around. Do a couple of circles in the sky and then come back there. Because I need to show, mankind needs to show what he can do. We need to show how strong we are, how big we are. And we have to realize, in Psalms 39, it says, man at his very best is altogether vanity. We have to know that. And us as believers, we have to see that how we're going to demonstrate the power of God, we demonstrate it through the restraint that we have. Amen. Christ has given us freedom. He's given us power. We have this treasure in earthen vessels. But the way that power is displayed is by the restraints that we put on. So Sometimes us as believers, we may get caught up in the freedom that we have. But I was reading as it's still going on. We'll get to Matthew chapter 11 and verse 28 in reading. Jesus is telling people, he says, "Come unto me, all ye that labor and are heavy laden, and I'll give you rest." We know that's the first rest. Then he says something next. He says in 29, "Take my yoke upon you, and learn of me, for I am meek and lowly in heart, and ye shall find rest unto your souls. For my yoke is easy, and my burden is light." Amen. So he comes, he gives us rest, he gives us freedom, he frees us from bondage. But then you know what he asks us to do next? Put ourselves back into bondage. Wait, I'm going to free you, but I want you to put my yoke on you now. Amen. Yoke yourself under me. Amen. You're free, and you have a choice. But I want you to put yourself back under bondage. Put yourself back under restraint. Because being in bondage, being under the restraint, he can demonstrate his power. I was thinking of, what was probably Christ's greatest miracle, his greatest display of power? Was it when he walked on water? Was it when he turned water into wine? Was it when he raised the dead? No. His greatest display of power is when he restrained himself. He said, I could have 12 legions of angels come down right now, and they would have wreaked havoc on the entire earth. Do you know what he did? Restrained himself. Then he went to the cross. That was his greatest display of power. To stay on that cross. Because remember what mankind was telling them? Do all that you can do. Get down. Show your power. Save yourself. And we'll follow you. What did he do? Restrained himself. So if we go to, I want to make sure I keep time, 1 Corinthians, we see the answer where God was talking about how his wisdom is shown. 1 Corinthians chapter 1. That's why in 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 18, it says, "For the preaching of the cross is to them that perish foolishness, but unto us which are saved, it is the power of God." Amen. We think God, his power was shown in him staying on that cross. But to mankind, it was foolish. Get down. Show us your strength. They didn't realize that he was displaying his full power. To stay there, it takes restraint. We know it really takes restraint and he says someone to turn the other cheek, to have control. And us as believers, we have to know that our power is shown in our restraint. That's why it says we're in the world, but we're not of it. Amen. We don't have to act like the world. We don't have to do everything that we can do. Just as when Jesus Christ was, it was shown more that what he could do by not eating than was with eating. We know we can eat things by faith, but more power is shown when we show that we don't have to eat. See, it's one thing to have the faith to eat. It's another thing to have the faith not to eat. How many people are impressed with me that if I can eat a steak, I can eat this steak in faith? I can eat this cake in faith. Or do you see the power of God when you have fasted and restrained yourself from food? Amen. All right. We can have that restraint. And we have to see, that's why the words that are used a lot in the scriptures in Ephesians 4, it says we have the Ephesians 4 and 3, it says he's given to us the unity of the Spirit in the what? Bond of peace, of restraint. He wants you to put on these restraints, to say that I'm bonded. I'm restrained to be at peace with my brothers. Amen. Or as he said, the love of Christ what? Constraineth us. I'm putting on restraints. But these bonds are the yoke of Christ, the bond of peace, the constraint of the love of Christ. Those are the bonds that we're putting on so that God's power is demonstrated. That's what we want to do so that Christ can be shown through us. Amen. Our life is shown by the restraint that we have as believers. We don't got to go run out and have the biggest names. That's what mankind wants to do. Call me doctor. We're caught up with those names, even in the body. You know, I respect that there's apostles, prophets, pastors, and teachers. But you know what title I seen that Christ had, that Paul had, that I've never seen a flyer with that name on it. Servant. Bond servant. How many of us have seen a flyer for a conference and the head speaker is a bond servant? Paul called himself that, and Christ became a servant. So that's my time. I'm going to ask Pastor Browning to come. Turn it over. Let's have restraint.